Well, good afternoon or good morning. And we're going back a long time. Well, maybe not for me, because I was 7 years old, and maybe not for you. But only 14% of the people who are American citizens today were alive on November 22nd, 1963. One of the last pictures of John F. Kennedy alive with Jackie Kennedy, John Connally, who was the Texas governor at the time, and they're in Dallas. But the JFK assassination wasn't the only thing that took place in 1963. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream speech, and that may have been inspired by Mahalia Jackson. In Vietnam, American troops were there, but they were all enlisted men. There were no draftees who went there. There were no protests in the streets because the people who were there wanted to be there or wanted to be in the military. Sit-ins and no service, that continues in the South. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is arrested again, this time in Birmingham, Alabama. There is the space race in the Cold War, and there is a Mercury mission taking off from Cape Canaveral. Valentina Tereshkova is the first woman ever in space. John F. Kennedy is in Berlin, where he gives a famous speech. George Wallace is the governor of Alabama, and he does not want African Americans attending the University of Alabama. And these guys have never faded from sight. The Beatles. And Beatlemania erupts in Europe. But we're going to start in Dallas, and that is me back in the year 2000. And up there is where Lee Harvey Oswald basically gunned down John Kennedy. And I know there's a lot of things about the Warren Commission, but it's also been almost 62 years. And if something untoward would have come out, it would have come out already. So more than likely, Lee Harvey Oswald was the gunman who killed John F. Kennedy. And in this picture here, there's only one person still alive, and that's Carolyn Kennedy and John F. Kennedy Jr. and Bobby Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy and Ted Kennedy. So the question is, was it the end of the 1950s innocence, or was the 1950s ever innocent? The answer to that, of course, is no, but it sort of begins the 1960s in a different direction America is taking, and the world. 1963, it's a divided country in a changing world, and this is in Bronxville, New York, and this is the last monument that was put up for John F. Kennedy. It was put up in 2017, the 100th anniversary of his birth. John Kennedy did not grow up in Massachusetts, as it's been proclaimed. He grew up in Bronxville, New York, at least from the age of 12. Robert F. Kennedy was 5 years old when he started growing up in Bronxville, and Teddy Kennedy was actually born in Bronxville. So this is the monument, and this monument ends with local man. Becomes president of the United States in November 1960, and there's nothing else about him. Nothing ever happens after that, according to this monument. But that's where he lived. 1963. Well, the Cuban Missile Crisis is in the rearview mirror, but the Cold War tensions between the United States and the USSR continue. The two countries installed a hotline between Moscow and Washington. There are 15,000 American advisors who are stationed in South Vietnam. And the civil rights movement continues with demonstrations in American southern states. Now, John Kennedy became the president of the United States on January 20th, 1961. And a couple days before he becomes president, he meets with Dwight Eisenhower, and they're talking about the issues that are going to be facing Kennedy. And Eisenhower gives him some advice, although the Kennedy people never relied on Eisenhower for any kind of advice. But Eisenhower said, listen, Laos is your number one problem in Southeast Asia, country of Laos. don't worry about Vietnam. Don't worry about it at all. It shouldn't be that much of a problem because we got this guy there, Diem, and he's our guy. And he is the guy who is standing up to Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese, and you can rely on him. Eisenhower had since 1955. Diem, assisted by the U.S. military and economic aid, beginning around 1955, after the French pulled out of Indochina in 1954, was able to resettle hundreds of thousands of refugees from North Vietnam to the south. But he's Catholic, and most of South Vietnam was Buddhist. And the Buddhists never really liked Diem, and he was very unacceptable, and Diem probably didn't like the Buddhists all that much either. And we're living with something called the domino theory. And it was distrust of the Soviet Union, and I'm sure you remember bomb shelters and all that from those days. And here's the finger of the USSR, maybe Khrushchev, and the dominoes are going to go. Laos will be first, and then Vietnam, and then Taiwan, and Korea, South Korea, since North Korea had fallen to the communists. Then the Philippines, and then Japan, and then Canada, and ultimately the United States would fall to communism. As a senator back in 1956, John F. Kennedy from Massachusetts advocated U.S. involvement in Vietnam. In President Eisenhower's view of 1954, the loss of Vietnam to communist control would lead to similar communist victories in neighboring countries in Southeast Asia. Laos, he was worried about Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and elsewhere, India, Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Australia, and New Zealand. The year does not start out well for the Americans in Vietnam. There's a battle called Apbac, and 3 are dead from that battle. It is January 2nd, and the Viet Cong claimed a victory after it shot down 5 U.S. helicopters. An American officer was killed, 3 other servicemen injured in the battle. The Battle of Apbac was the first major combat victory by the Viet Cong against South Vietnamese Army of the Republic of Vietnam and U.S. forces. Napalm is introduced. Napalm is a really nasty thing. You get burns, it goes right down to the bone. There was a napalm blast near Hue on February 28th. The segregationist takes office in Alabama, although there were segregationist governors, Russ Barnett in Mississippi for one, and this is George Wallace. And it is January the 14th, he becomes the governor of Alabama. In his inaugural address, he promises segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Meanwhile, this is East Germany. This is January 16th. That's Nikita Khrushchev meeting with East German officials. He makes the visit to the Berlin Wall, which had just been put up, from the East Berlin side. And he delivers an address to the communist leadership of East Germany at the SED Party Congress. And he claims that the USSR had a 100-megaton nuclear bomb, which scared school officials. And we did the old duck and cover under a desk. And I remember in 1961, I told my first grade teacher, Miss Topar, I don't want to duck and cover. Get under there. Well, why? Just get under there. If they're going to kill me, I might as well stand up. But later on, I found out that duck and cover, which they didn't explain in first grade, Mrs. Topar didn't really like me. She said that I was trying to take over the class, and she wasn't there the next year. Anyway, I learned later on that the radiation goes upwards, and if you're going to be within a mile of the bomb site, well, you're probably going to be finished. But if you're over a mile away, you might be able to escape if you're as low as you could be. But anyway, that was me and Mrs. Topar back in 1961, and the bomb. There is Mao Zedong from China, and Nikita Khrushchev from the Soviet Union. and they didn't like each other. They didn't like each other at all. Relationship between the Soviet Union and China reached a breaking point as the two governments engaged in an angry ideological debate about the future of communism. In June, officials from the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China met in Moscow. Chinese government had become openly critical of what it referred to as the growing counter-revolutionary trends in the Soviet Union. After all, the Soviets' dictator, Nikita Khrushchev, 1959, wanted to go to Disneyland. They didn't think that was all that good an idea, the Disneyland people. So instead, he went around groping actresses at Hollywood movie studios. How could you be a dictator of the Soviet Union and go enjoy Hollywood? But he did. Anyway, and in particular, China was unhappy with the Soviet Union's policy of cooperation with the West. Later that year, cooperation with the West, the nuclear test ban, first test ban agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union, ratified by the Senate on October 10th, the agreement banned the above-ground testing of nuclear weapons. You probably don't know this guy. His name is Harvey Gantt, and he ran for governor of North Carolina in 1996 against the segregationist Jesse Helms, rather the Senate seat in 1996 against Jesse Helms. But he made history. On January 28th, Gantt enters Clemson University in South Carolina, the last U.S. state to hold out against racial discrimination and desegregation. On May 28th, students and faculty from the Tugaloo College stayed a sit-in at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi. They were beaten as police watched. Now, I never got this. Why would you go to Woolworth's to eat? Anybody go to Woolworth's to eat? You did? What was the attraction?
Hamburgers and French fries.
Oh, okay. They were McDonald's before McDonald's. Hoping to avoid further disturbances, the owner of the Jackson, Mississippi Woolworth closed the lunch counter shortly after the sit-in. Anybody read this book, The Feminine Mystique, by Betty Friedan? What'd you think of the book? It was interesting. You read the book? What'd you think? Well, it comes out in 19...
It started something.
It started something. It did. The book is the beginning of the women's rights movement in the United States. Betty Friedan came from Rockland County. And a friend of mine's father knew her husband, and it was not a happy marriage, he told me, between Betty and her husband. Betty Friedan graduated college as a psychologist, but never had a career. When she wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1962-63, she was a suburban housewife, Grandview on the Hudson, New York, Rockland County, overlooking the Hudson River and overlooking the Tappan Zee Bridge. She was a mother who supplemented her husband's income by writing freelance articles for women's magazines. She intended on writing, hold on one second, we have a problem here.
Technical glitch.
Hopefully it comes back on. If it doesn't, it doesn't. She intended on writing a magazine article on her life, but nobody was interested. She wrote about the gradual change of American women from being housewives, or actually, is this thing coming back on? I guess it's not. From independent, career-minded women in the 1920s and 30s into the vacant apron housewives of the post-war years, the post-war 1945 on. And you would have seen a picture of Betty Friedan here. Let me try this again.
What happened to the...
What happened to the picture? Don't know what happened to the picture. Hopefully it works. Anyway, she started to write The Feminine Mystique as a magazine article. 1957, and no magazine editor wanted her. It was in 1957, and there was a reunion of her graduating class at Smith College. She decided to ask the people at Smith College, who graduated in 1942, was your education, did that hamper you in your marriage? And did that hamper you becoming a wife or a mother? And what she discovered was that the women's responses was a nameless, aching dissatisfaction that she would famously call the problem that has no name.
Do we have to call a techie in?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to call a techie in. Hopefully this will get going again. So,
Call the desk.
yeah. Anyway, the woman's answers became the content of a magazine piece. It would become a book, foundation of what would start as women's liberation. The book pushed Congress. Now, you would see under normal circumstances a picture of Gloria Steinem up here. And Gloria Steinem was a Playboy bunny, undercover Playboy bunny. She was a journalist. And I'm going to give you a story, not about Gloria Steinem, but about somebody I knew, or dated actually, a woman named Charlene Adlick, who was Miss Rockland County in 1978. And I dated her. And we were talking one day. She graduated from Boston University. She was a teacher. She was an art teacher. And we were talking. And I said, what enticed you to enter a beauty pageant? And because she didn't need the money, her father was an assistant district attorney in New York City, Manhattan. And she said, just for the hell of it. But if you entered the pageant, the Miss America pageant at the time, you had a chance to win a college scholarship. That's what it was. The pageant would offer you a college scholarship. And she won Miss Rockland County. And then she went up to Rochester, and she was supposed to, she was supposed to win, but she didn't win. But I asked her about that. I said, what did you do up there? And she said, well, basically, I was walking around for lecherous men, because the men are the ones who judge. And, you know, she had to do the swimsuit. She could play the guitar. She couldn't sing, but she could play the guitar. And that was her talent, playing the guitar. And so I said, so how do you impress a lecherous guy? And she said to me, well, it is pretty simple. You learn how to walk. And she looks at me and she says, what size shoe do you take? I said, size 12. She said, no, that doesn't do, that doesn't do. I said, why? She said, well, I wanted to teach you how to walk on the runway. And basically, you have to swivel your rear end and make sure that there's Gloria Steinem. You have to swivel your rear end, and you have to swing to basically to attract their attention. And then she said she did some other things. First of all, I didn't know this, but if you put Vaseline on your teeth, constantly smile, and that was a trick of the trade. Also, she could go from a 34B to a 36C in a matter of seconds, and she also stuffed the back of her swimsuit to make it stick out a bit more. So that's how you attract lecherous men. Funny thing, at the Playboy Club, you attracted lecherous men the same way. The same way. Now, she did this in 1978, and Gloria Steinem did it in 1963. Gloria Steinem was a political activist who helped create New York and Ms. magazines and was the co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus, Free the Bee Foundation, Women's Media Center, and Women's Action Alliance. And she was a journalist. She went undercover for Show magazine to see what it was really like to work for New York City's Playboy Club at 5 East 59th Street. Anybody ever go to the Playboy Club? You did.
I think I did.
You think you did, but you don't know.
Actually, I was friendly with the son of a newspaper columnist at the time.
Oh, okay.
Very popular with the New York Post.
Who was that?
And he made the rounds.
Okay, so that's how you got.
Yeah, that's how.
That's how you went there. We at WGRC Radio, where I was working there, we had the choice of playing touch football or softball against the Playboy Bunnies at Great Gorge.
Leonard Lyons.
Oh, Leonard Lyons, Jeffrey Lyons, Jeffrey Lyons.
George
Yeah.
Lyons, the older brother.
The older brother was your friend. Jeffrey Lyons, I think, is still doing the Lions Den or whatever. But anyway, so we had a choice. Could we play? Of course, we wanted to play touch football, but it ended up being, softball. And we were warned, don't mess around with the girls. You'll get yourself in trouble. Don't mess around with the girls. And we never did. But anyway, so she writes this magazine piece. And what she found was a world of stuffed bosoms. Remember where Charlene could go from 34B to 36C. Low pay, high heels, and of course you walked on the catwalk with your high heels. The story that ran in Show's May and June issues was a story that was called A Bunny's Tale. And what she wrote about was a struggle of women who more or less were objectified for a living. A change was going to come. Now, this woman here, where is she? Where's Edith Green? Edith Green is in there. Edith Green, there she is. Edith Green was a congresswoman from Oregon who was elected back in 1954. And in 1955, one of the first things she did was propose legislation that women and men get paid equal money for the same job if they have equal experience and equal education. That was 1955. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was signed into law on June 10th by John F. Kennedy. Congress stated that sex discrimination depresses wages and living standards for employees and prevents the maximum utilization of the available labor resources. It has not been enforced evenly in the 62 years since it was passed. 1961, Francisco Franco, the dictator of Spain, passed an Equal Pay Act that made sure women and men got the same pay for the same job with the same education. 62 years after this was passed, women are still complaining they're not getting the same pay as men. The women's movement would become the United States' second civil rights movement behind the Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.-led civil rights movement. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, become familiar with Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein comes into power. Iraq, the first coup d'etat is in February. The Ramadan Revolution, or the February 8th revolution, was a coup d'etat in Iraq, military coup by the Ba'ath Party, Iraqi wing, which overthrew the 5-year-old regime of the Prime Minister of Iraq, Abd al-Khmir Qasim. Saddam Hussein would return to Iraq after a 4-year exile, with the Ba'ath Party taking power. Why was he out of Iraq? Well, in 1959, he tried to kill al-Karim Qasim, and he fled to Egypt, and that's where he ended up for a while. Meanwhile, the Ba'ath Party coup in Syria, the Ramadan Revolution, or the February 8th Revolution, was a coup d'etat in Iraq, was a military coup by the Ba'ath Party's wing. There it is again, planned by the military and by the Syrian regional branch of the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, rather than the Ba'ath Party's civilian leadership. But Mikhail Aflaq, the leader of the party, consented to the conspiracy. The leading members of the military committee through the planning process and immediately afterwards taking power were Mohammed, Umran, Salah, Jahid, and Hafez al-Assad. Well, John F. Kennedy wants to get reelected in 1964. And he's got two problems that he's facing. One is the civil rights movement. And he can't do much about the civil rights movement because he cannot upset Southern Democrats. He upsets Southern Democrats who, like George Wallace, like segregation, he may not get the vote. The other thing is Vietnam. He's committed to Vietnam, but he knows Vietnam is becoming a quagmire. So what is he supposed to do? Quagmire? Well, yeah, quagmire. So he's got these two major problems, and both of them can derail his ability to be reelected in 1964 if, say, he supports the civil rights movement, or if, say, he pulls the troops out of Vietnam. So he's got these two problems. JFK was slow in supporting the civil rights movement in 1961-62. 1961, JFK would eventually support the freedom rights movement to a certain extent. Remember the Freedom Riders?
Of course.
Of course, their bus was blown up in 1961 in May, but it would take him until November, him and his brother, the Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, to end segregation on interstate buses in 1961. James Meredith tried to go to the University of Mississippi in 1962 in September, and the federal government had to help him. They backed his right to do so. The Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett vowed to block Meredith from attending classes. Meredith once again tried to register for classes, this time with federal marshals at his side. Rioting erupted on campus. 2 people were killed. One was a French photographer. So this story had legs in Europe, particularly in France, because a French photographer was killed. Kennedy sent the federal troops to the campus, and Meredith was eventually able to attend class. In 1962, Kennedy did issue an executive order to end housing discrimination, but Kennedy turned a deaf ear to civil rights leaders who said, you know, we need civil rights legislation. Where is it? And there was a lot of intimidation going on. This is from the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Imagine Henry Ford, a civil rights museum? Henry Ford, of all people? Well, his kids and his grandkids wanted to clean up his image. KKK rally, January 6th, 1 mile 301 on Highway 574, 7:30 p.m., the KKK. And there was segregation. It was 2 Americas. There's the white waiting room, typical white waiting room at a bus station, and it's all clean, and it's all mildewed in the color waiting room. Again, this is the Henry Ford Museum. How many of you went to Penn Station in New York? The original Penn Station, not where the garden is today. The original Penn Station. Well, the original Penn Station had different water fountains. They had water fountains for whites and water fountains for colored people. New York City, 1963. Going to jail for demonstrating. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. By the way, he was barely 5 foot 4 inches tall. I don't know if you know that or not. He was about 5 foot 4. And I have gone twice to the King Center in Atlanta, and they have laid out his clothes, some of his clothes. And it's the kind of clothes you get for teenagers, boys, who are about 12 or 13 before the growth spurt. He was rather small in stature. And he's prisoner 7089. It is April 12th. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on Good Friday violated a court-order injunction prohibiting civil rights demonstrations in Birmingham, Alabama. Local police officers arrested King and a handful of supporters, including the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and transported them to the Birmingham City Jail, where 40 years earlier, a prisoner had penned a mournful folk ballad about the place that included the line, "Write me a letter, send it by mail, send it in care of the Birmingham Jail." Early during his 8-day imprisonment, King began composing a response to white ministers who questioned why King and protesters had chosen to stage their protests in Birmingham. These pieces of paper were given to his lawyer and became known as the letter from the Birmingham Jail, maybe the most important written document of the civil rights era. He was fighting injustice. By the way, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is no longer going to print a physical newspaper, it's going to be all online very shortly. In 1946, 17-year-old M.L. King Jr. wrote a letter to the editor. What did he say? He was fighting injustice. 1946. Images that were brought into the living room. Television played a major role in the civil rights movement, whether it was Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 or Birmingham in 1963. And here's the Birmingham Fire Department with their fire hoses knocking down protesters. Birmingham, Alabama officials' reaction to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King-led demonstrations changed perception. Television caught beatings, police beatings of nonviolent marchers, firemen turning their high-pressure hoses on defenseless men, women and children, police dogs shredding the clothing of demonstrators on video. New York Times was rather slow in getting around to covering the civil rights movement. In fact, they were extremely slow. The New York Times, Southern newspapers were ignoring the civil rights movement for the most part. But this does appear on the cover of the New York Times on May 4th, and that gets John Kennedy's attention, the attack dog going after a 17-year-old. The picture of Walter Gattazin, 17-year-old civil rights demonstrator, defying an anti-parade ordinance in Birmingham, Alabama, attacked by a police dog on May 3rd, gets to John Kennedy. On May 4th, during a meeting at the White House with members of a political group, Kennedy discussed the photo, which appeared on the front page of the New York Times. He's beginning to feel the pressure, not because of the civil rights leaders, but because of newspapers, television, newspapers and television. And here, fire hoses in Birmingham, Alabama, May 8th. This woman is soaking wet. Meanwhile, he's got that problem. He's got another problem too, Vietnam. This is a very busy 2 weeks for him. We don't have a prayer of staying in Vietnam, Kennedy confided to a friend in April. Those people hate us. They're going to throw our asses out of there at any point. But I can't give up that territory to the communists and get the American people to re-elect me. Let that sink in. People are getting killed, but he wants to be re-elected, and he does not think he can be re-elected if he pulls the troops out of Vietnam. And the troops in Vietnam, well, they're the enlistees. There are no draftees who are going there at this point. And he's also shaking about what is going on in Birmingham. And the world is watching this, Birmingham. Here's another picture. Keep Birmingham schools white. And they're going to hang that at some point with the Confederate flag. The New York Times published more stories about civil rights in those 2 weeks than it had in the previous 2 years.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The 4 little girls that were killed.
That comes later.
Okay.
That comes later. Televised scenes of children campaigning against rigid segregation, being bitten by dogs, knocked off their feet by water fired with enough power to rip the bark off a tree, caused international outrage. Well, as JFK prepares to address the nation on June 11th, George Wallace decides, you know what? I don't want Virginia Malone to go to school here. The Alabama governor, George Wallace, came to national prominence when he kept a campaign pledge to stand in the schoolhouse door to block integration of Alabama public schools. Governor Wallace proclaimed, when he first stood in the doorway to block the attempt of 2 black students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, to register at the University of Alabama. And Kennedy sent federalized the Alabama National Guard to allow them in. Wallace then stepped aside, returned to Montgomery, allowing the students to enter. Oddly enough, Wallace and James Hood became very good friends later on in life, even though James Hood was the guy he wanted to stop going in. Meanwhile, around this time, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference begin making plans for a march on Washington. It is June 11th, same day that President Kennedy is to address the nation on civil rights. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference announces plans to demonstrate in Washington for new civil rights legislation. The group calls for a massive, militant, monumental sit-in on Congress and massive acts of civil disobedience all over the country. Kennedy does make the speech. The administration, though, seems to be dithering on what exactly to do. And then something else happens that night. Medgers Evers is killed in Mississippi. But this is the speech that Kennedy gives prior to Medgers Evers being killed. It ought to be possible for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodations, such as hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal. It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being an American without regard to his race or his color. This is 1963. Is there a pronoun missing there? There is. Her. 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 It's just his color, his race. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he, not she. It's no she there. He would wish to be treated as one would wish his, not her, his children to be treated. But this is not the case. 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, not their granddaughters, their grandsons are not fully free. Mentality of 1950s man or post-World War II men, and you got Betty Friedan pointing that out at that point. Meanwhile, Medgers Evers was assassinated, and he had been targeted for death for a long time. May 28th, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the garage of his home, and 5 days before his death, he was nearly run down by a car as he emerged from the Jackson, Mississippi NAACP office. In Jackson, on June 12th, Evers pulled into his driveway after returning from an integration meeting where he conferred with NAACP lawyers. Emerging from his car and carrying his NAACP t-shirts that stated "Jim Crow must go," he was struck in the back with a bullet that ricocheted into his home. He staggered 30 feet before collapsing and dying at a local hospital 50 minutes later. 1994, 31 years and 3 trials later, Evers' killer, Byron D. La Beckwith, was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
Why
And
did it take
Edgar's,
so long?
Why?
I do a whole talk on that one. The FBI hid evidence. Let me explain something. Being a journalist, I knew a lot of journalists, right? Knew a guy by the name of Fred. Fred was the bureau chief of United Press in the South from 1958 to 1962. He was a Jew from New York, and he was writing too much about what was going on. And he told me some of the stuff. He said everybody knew what was going on down there. So the police were part of the Klan, the lawyers were part of the Klan, the judges were part of the Klan, and if something came up where a white guy, and if he didn't boast about it, they just looked the other way, which I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes about the bombing of the 4 deaths of the teenagers at the church. And they hid evidence for a long, long time, and finally that came to light in 1993, 94. There's a movie that stars Alec Baldwin about this particular case, and La Beckwith. They hid, as Fred told me, used to hide things. But they hide things out in the open. Believe it or not, they'd hide things out in the open. Everybody knew, but nobody did anything. It's the same thing with civil rights leaders that got killed in Mississippi in 1964. The only difference was in 1955, can't think of the kid's name right now, who was killed in 1955 in Jackson, in Mississippi, where Emmett Till. His mother had an open casket, and the body was photographed by Gent magazine, and that put a lot of pressure in Mississippi on the people who boasted about it.
But you had J. Edgar Hoover, who
Yeah,
was
Hoover.
absolutely
Yeah.
on the side of Bedford.
Yeah, him and, and he wants to get rid of Martin Luther, but Malcolm X, but those are other talks for other days. Evers and his wife Merle established the NAACP office in Jackson, Mississippi in the mid-1950s. He led marches, prayer vigils, and voter registration drives and boycotts. As early as 1955, Evers' name appeared on the death list. Yet he persistently appealed to blacks and whites to work together for a peaceful solution to social problems. He orchestrated a boycott of white merchants in Jackson in the early 1960s. Well, John F. Kennedy gets out of town. He's got to go to Berlin, and they send his brother Bobby to address protesters on June 14th. And there's no concrete policy. They just send him out there, and he basically says, yeah, we'll do something, we'll do something, we'll do something. But they had no policy. They didn't know what to do. What should we do? Well, why? We got to get the president reelected. In 1964, we take firm action. He may not get reelected. Meanwhile, John F. Kennedy is in Berlin, and he gives his I Am a Berliner speech. Whereas Khrushchev was there in January on the East Berlin side, Kennedy is there on the West Berlin side. And he says, there are many people in the world who really don't understand or say they don't what is this great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. There are some who say that communism is the way of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are some who say in Europe and elsewhere, we could work with the communists. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it is true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Let them knock Berlin kommen. Let them come to Berlin. How many of you are familiar with A. Philip Randolph?
Of course.
Oh, a couple of you, okay. He was the Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King of his time, back in the 1930s and 40s, and before him was W.E.B. Du Bois. And here he is, and there is John Kennedy, and it is going to be a summer with a massive march on Washington. With A. Philip Randolph planning a march for jobs, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference planning One for Freedom, the two groups decided to merge efforts into one mass protest. The Randolph and his chief, aide, Bayard Rustin March would call for fair treatment and equal opportunity for black Americans, as well as for the advocate for the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Now, there was a planned protest like this in 1941, and Eleanor Roosevelt basically got rid of it as best she could. And I'll explain that. This is 1941. Why should we march? 15,000 Negroes assembled in St. Louis, Missouri. 20,000 Negroes assembled at Chicago. 23,500 Negroes assembled in New York City. Millions of Negroes, Americans over this great land claim the right to be free. Free from what? Free from fear. Free from Jim Crow. He was a civil rights lawyer, and he led 5 marches on Washington. Before the 1963 march, he led 3 smaller marches in the 1950s for school segregation. In 1941, with blacks excluded from jobs in the defense industry, he began traveling around the country, rallying potential marchers with a message: we loyal Negro American citizens demand the right to work and fight for our country. President Franklin D. Roosevelt invited Randolph, with Eleanor's persuasion, fact, a lot of Eleanor's persuasion, because he didn't want to do it. He may run for re-election again in 1944, but then again, he's already in his third term. How many terms is he going to serve? But on June 25th, 1941, 6 days before the march was scheduled to take place, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, banning discrimination in the government and defense industry, and again, a great assist there to Eleanor Roosevelt. So the big six are meeting in New York, including John Lewis, who is a young, very young man at a college at this point, Whitney Young and Randolph and Martin Luther King, among others. So they were at the Roosevelt Hotel. It's July 2nd, and it is King, it is Randolph, Whitney Young, James Farmer, Roy Wilkins, the big six. It was Randolph who got them all on the same page. And they have demands. And it's not just for African Americans. It's for women as well, and poor whites. And here are their demands. Comprehensive and effective civil rights legislation from the present Congress without compromise or filibuster to guarantee all Americans access to public accommodations, decent housing, adequate and integrated education, the right to vote, withholding of federal funds from all programs in which discrimination exists. Desegregate schools. This guy's probably my age right now. We protest school segregation, and this is taking place, and this is taking place in various American cities. Desegregation of all school districts by the end of 1963. Enforcement of the 14th Amendment, reducing congressional representation of states where citizens are disenfranchised. A new executive order banning discrimination in all housing supported by federal funds. Authority for the Attorney General to institute injunctive suits when any constitutional right is violated. A massive federal program to train and place all unemployed workers, Negroes and whites, on meaningful and dignified jobs at decent wages. A national minimum wage act that will give all Americans a decent standard of living. A broadened Fair Labor Standards Act to include all areas of employment which are presently excluded. A federal Fair Employment Practices Act, barring discrimination by federal, state, and municipal governments, and by employers, contractors, employment agencies, and trade unions. This is a summer protest. That is Los Angeles. Segregated schools must stop now. Meanwhile, this guy owns a luncheonette. And this guy cracks an egg over this protester. The man's name is Robert Fesenfet. He is the owner of a segregated lunchroom in Cambridge, Maryland. And he douses a white integrationist with water on July 8th. The integrationist is Edward Dickerson. And he's among 3 whites and 8 African-American protesters who knelt on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant to sing freedom songs. A raw egg, which Fedson felt had broken over Dickerson's head moments earlier, is still visible on the back of Dickerson's head. The protesters, they were arrested. According to the United States Justice Department, in the 10 weeks before the August 28th March on Washington, there were 758 demonstrations in 186 cities. 14,773 people were arrested. Cross-Burley, August the 3rd. This is Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and this is during the height of the COVID pandemic, and we have a family member who owned a place in Great Barrington, so we went there. And I decided, let's go see where W.E.B. Du Bois, his childhood area. Now, the home's not there. The area is, the land is a little park there now, and they have posters of W.E.B. Du Bois. He dies. In 1905, Du Bois was a founder and general secretary of the Niagara Movement, an African-American protest group of scholars and professionals. Du Bois founded and edited The Moon, 1906, the Horizon 1907 to 1910 as organs for the Niagara movement, a movement that failed but eventually would morph into the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And he ran for Senate, state of New York, 1950, as a socialist. 1909, he was among the founders of the NAACP. From 1910 to 34, served as its director of publicity and research, a member of the board of directors and founder and editor of The Crisis, the monthly magazine. 1950, he ran for Senate, state of New York. In the 1950s, his socialist views got him in trouble during the McCarthy era. He would die in Ghana, but never renounced his American citizenship on August 27th. That was the night before this, the March on Washington. It is August 28th.
Yes.
About 250,000 people. Anybody go down there for that one? You did. So you saw the speech. You saw the I Have a Dream speech. So they gather, and they're protesting in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Randolph led off the day's diverse array of speakers, closing his speech with the promise, we here today are only the first wave. When we leave, it will be to carry the civil rights revolution home with us into every nook and cranny of the land, and we shall return again and again to Washington in ever-growing numbers until total freedom is ours. And that is what Washington looked like. The city of Washington on both sides does not look like that anymore. It was built up, it's been built up. But there they are. The mall, the Washington Monument, and all looking at the stage. Other speakers followed, including Bayard Rustin, the NAACP President Roy Wilkins, John Lewis of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, civil rights veterans Daisy Lee Bates, and the actors Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee. And the march also featured musical performances from the likes of Marian Anderson, who did her, yeah, a whole bunch of people. Marian Anderson was returning to the scene of the crime, so to speak, because she's sung there, 1939. Joan Baez, who's still around. Bob Dylan, who's still performing, and Mahalia Jackson. Well, this is the story. At least Mahalia Jackson told this story about Martin Luther King. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. King originally thought the speech should be lower key since he was speaking to a broad audience about controversial themes. He looked over the crowd. As he later explained in an interview, all of a sudden this thing came to me that I've used. Well, did he hear it from Mahalia Jackson, who had a loud voice? I've used it many times before, this thing about I have a dream. I just felt that I didn't just wanted to use it here. It speaks off the cuff. I have a dream. Now, I was in the radio business, and there was once a station called WCBS News Radio 88, which was put out of business last year by Odyssey. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but it was put out of business. It should have been put out of business, but it was. Rich Lamb was part of WCBS. So is Jane Tillman Irving, my friend Jane Tillman Irving. And in 2013, she was a teenager, and she went to her mother and brother down to Washington. In 2013, and it's not available anymore because WCBS News Radio 88 does not exist anymore, which is an absolute shame. Anyway, she put together a report 50 years later about being a teenager at that speech. Now, there was something called the Green Book in those days. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Green Book. There was a movie about the Green Book, and basically it was put out by a guy by the name of Victor Green in Harlem, and he chronicled where, as an African American from the mid-1930s through 1965, where you could go on vacation without having any problems.
They should show it here.
Yeah.
I heard about it.
Yeah, they show the movie here?
No.
Oh, they should show.
At the Amsterdam, it was shown.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so it's the Green Book. And they forgot. The Jane Tillman Irving's family forgot about the grade book. This is what she told me. It was an inspiring speech. It was, this is the moment for us. Then the reality kicked in. America was still a segregated nation. They had to go for gas to get back to New York. No can do. We don't serve black people. Gas station that they went to, they eventually got gas, only served whites. Hotels refused Negroes. Nothing had changed. In fact, it gets worse. Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Birmingham. It's September 15th, less than 3 weeks after the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. A dynamite bomb planted by Klansmen explodes inside the 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 young girls. Anna Mae Collins, who now would be 76, was 14. Denise McNair was 11. She would be 73 now. Carolyn Robertson and Cynthia Wellesley were both 14. They'd be 76 now. 20 others were injured in the attack, and it was timed during a Youth Day tribute to local people in the Birmingham campaign. The FBI concealed evidence. The FBI concealed evidence. J. Edgar Hoover. You know, right? You know, everybody knew who did it. Everybody knew who did it. He did. Robert Chambliss, convicted of murder in 1977. Thomas Blanton in 2001. Bobby Frank Cherry, 2002. The 4th bomber, Herman Cash, died in 1994 without ever being indicted. Meanwhile, there was a song called Only in America. Remember that song, Only in America? It's done by Jay Black and the Americans. However, Jay Black and the Americans were not supposed to do that song. In April, the Drifters, remember the Drifters? A rhythm and blues group recorded a song containing the lyric, "Only in America can a kid without a cent get a break and maybe grow up to be president." It would have been a hit for the Drifters, but the Atlantic Records executive, Jerry Wexler, who was Jewish, pulled the recording. He was looking at what was going on in the South. He thought it would be unfeeling and unfitting to have a black group release a song about America being the land of opportunity, and suggested that an African American could become president. The patriotic lyrics replaced Barry Mann and Cynthia Wilde's original words. Cynthia Wilde just died within the last 6 months. Only in America, land of opportunity, can they save a seat in the back of the bus just for me. Only in America, where they preach the golden rule, will they start to march when my kids want to go to school. Those were the original lyrics. Well, and that's the Drifters. Well, Atlantic Records said to Mann and Wilde, rewrite the lyrics. They refused. Well, Lieber and Stoller, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, came in, rewrote the lyrics, and Wexler gave the song to a predominantly Jewish group, Jay and the Americans. The lead singer was Jay Black, whose name was David Black. Howard was in there, Sandy was in there, and the song did get to 25 on the charts. At that time, no African American, no Jew had ever become president. The Drifters recording was eventually released in 1996. Change is gonna come. Well, that's a Sam Cooke song. Change is gonna come, but not yet. October 8th, Sam Cooke and his band are arrested after trying to register at a whites-only motel in Louisiana. In the months that follow, he would record the song and write a song called "The Change Is Gonna Come." Well, the year is about ready to come to an end. And Eisenhower's guy, DM, is assassinated in South Vietnam. It's preceded by this, a Buddhist monk putting himself on fire. That is Thich Quang Duc's suicide. The suppression of Buddhists in South Vietnam became known as the Buddhist crisis. The president, DM, did little to ease the tensions. He did say we'll reform. Many people suspected that his brother and closest advisor, New, was the actual decision maker in the Saigon government and the person behind the Buddhist suppression. The demonstrations continued through the summer, culminated when the Buddhist monk publicly lit himself on fire. That photograph goes around the world, causes all kinds of problems for John Kennedy, for Robert McNamara. What to do? What to do? Well, Kennedy tells Diem, you need to reform things in Saigon. Diem says no. Diem declared martial law, and his forces raided the pagodas of the Buddhist group behind the protests. Soon after, South Vietnamese military officers contacted the U.S. government and representatives and said, hey, you want us to knock him off? You want us to get rid of him? We'll do it. We'll do it. No questions asked. We'll do it. But do you want it? Well, they wanted to know, if we plan a coup, what is Kennedy going to do? Anyway, that's Ike and Diem. Under the President Eisenhower and Kennedy, the U.S. had given millions of dollars to introduce and to prop up. I have to put a, hang on one second here. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Hold on one second, because the screen's going to go if I don't do this. Hold on one second. Anyway. You know, the United States has given millions of dollars to prop up the regime, so to speak. And on September 2nd, John Kennedy is interviewed by Walter Cronkite, who at this point was not the most trusted man in America. But anyway, he gives an interview to Walter Cronkite, and he discusses what is going on in South Vietnam. And JFK tells Old Iron Pants, that was his nickname, Old Iron Pants, the regime has gotten out of touch with the people. Well, there is a coup. There will be a coup. And the coup comes on November 1st. South Vietnamese generals used a strong military force to seize control of several strategically important outposts in Saigon and other areas of South Vietnam. Initially, Diem and his brother refused to surrender. When it became clear they could not stop the coup from succeeding, they used a secret exit to escape the presidential palace after dark. But they were unable to elude their pursuers, and at a Catholic church, big men, Dong Ven Men, finds them, orders the execution of both men, and he becomes the leader of the country. Kennedy is stunned and upset when he learned of Diem's murder. The Nasserists take over in Iraq. The second Iraqi coup of 1963 starts on November 13th, ends on November 18th. Following Ba'ath Party divisions, pro-Nasserist Iraqi forces led a military coup within the Ba'ath Party. The coup was bloodless, but 250 people were killed. Related actions. The Nasserists were named after the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser, who favored Arab unity. Okay, it is May 22nd, 1963, and I'm going to ask everybody but you, where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
I was driving down the Major Deegan Highway to the medical school.
So you go to medical school. Where were you?
Was in the kitchen making supper.
Yeah, where were you? Do you remember?
I had just graduated from Stanford University.
Just graduated. Where were you two?
I was home because I was sick out of school.
Where was I?
You were medical school.
Oh, I was in medical school.
Okay, so everybody knows where they were. I remember where I was in 7th grade. I was in Dominic's Deli. I had the day off from school. And I heard, 7 years old, not exactly sure what happened, but I was 7 years old when this came down. I knew Larry O'Brien. He was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. He was in Kennedy's inner circle with Powers and Kenny O'Donnell. I actually did work with Kenny O'Donnell's daughter later on in life. Also Pierre Salinger was around, and so those people were around. Kennedy's Boston Irish Mafia, although Theodore Sorensen, who was Kennedy basically writing, He was Norwegian with a Jewish mother. So Salinger wasn't Irish, nor was Sorensen, but the other guys were. They referred to themselves as the Irish Mafia. So Kennedy's in Texas, and he's on a 3-day swing in Texas looking to sell himself in 1964. And Larry O'Brien didn't tell me this story, but he told this story to my friend Marv Schneider, who was with the Associated Press. They used to have breakfast with commissioners of sports. Larry O'Brien was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. And Marv told me the story. And he said Larry related to him, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, November 22nd, and Kennedy can't sleep. They're in a hotel in Fort Worth. So Kennedy calls O'Brien, he says, let's go for a walk. If you're the president of the United States, you can't go for a walk at 4 o'clock in the morning. So they gather the Secret Service and they decide, let's go up to the roof of the Fort Worth, Texas hotel and we'll walk around. And it's overcast, it's raining, and O'Brien said to Marv, he said, Jack looks at me, Jack Kennedy looks at me, and he says, it's a great big world out there. They want to get me, they're going to get me. Well, he goes back downstairs, and they decide there are so many people outside the hotel, let him go out there, say hello, give a little speech. It's raining, but there's Lyndon Johnson, but he's not too worried about it. Let's do something. You know, the people are waiting, they want to see you. A light rain was falling on Friday morning, November 22nd, but a crowd of several thousand people stood in the parking lot outside the Texas hotel where the Kennedys spent the night. Platform was set up, and the president, wearing no protection against the weather, came out, made some brief remarks. No faint hearts in Fort Worth, and I appreciate you being here this morning. Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself. It takes longer, of course. She looks better than we do when she does it. Isn't that a sexist remark?
Oh, it's very sweet.
Well, sweet. It's also sexist. What do you think of it? He went on to talk about the nation's need for being second to none in defense and in space, for continued growth in the economy, and the willingness of citizens of the United States to assume the burdens of leadership. And finally, here she is, and she walks in. Kennedy knew that he had a secret weapon to get to voters. It was Jackie. They liked Jackie. Jackie was 34 years old. She was in mourning. She had just lost a child. But Americans liked her. They really liked her. They may not have liked JFK, but they really liked Jackie Kennedy. And she had never gone out on the stump, and she goes out on the stump first time since the baby died. And she had been in a Great Depression, but they get her out there, and she's out there trying to help the president. Inside the hotel, the president spoke at the breakfast of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, focusing on military preparations. We are still the keystone in the arch of freedom. We will continue to do our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead. Okay, I'm going to do the what if. What if it continued to rain? What if it continued to rain? Would that car be open? Yes or no? It would not have been open. But he wanted to be seen. Now, they did release the motorcade route about 3 or 4 days prior to the motorcade. And so all this conspiracy stuff and all of that, if there was a conspiracy, they'd have about 2 days to put it together. That was about it. Anyway, it is about 12:30 Central Time. Crowds of excited people lined the streets, waved to the Kennedys. Car turned off Main Street at Dealey Plaza around 12:30. As it was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunfire suddenly reverberated in the plaza. Bullets struck the president's neck and head. He slumped over toward Jackie. Texas Governor John Connally was shot in the back. He survived. Anybody ever been to Dallas? You have. Have you been there?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how close the shot was. 200 feet. That was it, 200 feet. Well, this is when he becomes the most trusted man in America. Old Iron Pants delivers the news. Delivers it, breaks down for a minute. wipes a tear from his eye, composes himself, glasses back on, old iron pants is back in the saddle. The assassin, well, the accused assassin is Lee Harvey Oswald. Police arrested him, a recently hired employee of the Texas School Book Depository in the movie theater. He was being held for the assassination of President Kennedy and fatal shooting shortly afterwards of patrolman J.D. Tippit on the Dallas Street. LBJ is sworn in. He's sworn in by a justice, Sarah Hughes, who is the only woman ever to swear a president into office. And he wanted Jackie there, show support. Jackie did go, but she insisted she was not going to change her clothes. She wanted the world to see what had been done to her husband. The plane would leave Dallas to Washington, D.C. I'm not going to get into the autopsy and all that other stuff and the conspiracy theories. Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, that we know. But the question is, why was Jack Ruby walking around the Dallas police headquarters? Why? He was a strip joint owner, and the cops were all friendly with him, and apparently he had the run of the headquarters. Oswald was supposed to be transferred from police headquarters to the county jail. Viewers across America saw the live television coverage. Suddenly a man aims a pistol and fires at point-blank range. It was Jack Rubenstein, a local nightclub owner, strip joint owner. Oswald died 2 hours later at Parkland Hospital. The funeral is November 25th, 1963, attended by heads of state and representatives from more than 100 countries, untold millions watching it on TV. At the gravesite, Jacqueline Kennedy and her husband and his brothers, Robert and Edward, lit the eternal flame. So did you ever wonder what happened to that car?
Yes.
You ever wonder? Ever see it?
No.
It's in the Henry Ford Museum. There it is, right there, with the top on. This is the Henry Ford Museum, and this describes the car. Tragedy occurs. The modern, new four-door convertible seemed well suited to a young, forward-thinking president. But tragedy struck when President Kennedy was assassinated, November 1963, while riding the car through the streets of Dallas. As the world mourned, the Secret Service quickly took steps to have this vehicle rebuilt so it would better protect future presidents. Later modifications during the Johnson and Nixon presidencies only served to illustrate the continual tension between the president's desire to be seen and Secret Service efforts to protect them. Used by John F. Kennedy, occasionally used by Lyndon Johnson, Dick Nixon, Gerald R. Ford, and Jimmy Carter. They did not retire the car, which they probably should have, didn't retire it. Not at all. It was in use for another 15 years afterwards. Can you imagine sitting in that car? They used it. Meanwhile, it was November 22nd, 1963, and on old Cronkite show, the Beatles, they were supposed to be introduced to a massive audience, Cronkite's audience. However, in that morning, CBS Morning News with Mike Wallace, there was a report on the Beatles. They did a profile on them in a segment that was scheduled to be repeated on the nightly news show with Walter Cronkite, the one that was watched. It was shelved. Cronkite did the Beatles piece on December 10th. Mercury astronauts, that mission ends. The space war, Cold War, was heating up with the U.S. and the USSR wanting to land a man on the moon first. The Mercury missions ended after NASA proved it could get astronauts in orbit around Earth. Soviet Union put a woman in space. Congress was not sure putting man on the moon was worth the cost, given the problems that America had. I only throw this in about Malaysia because there I am with the president of Malaysia, Najib Razak, in 2012. On September 16th, Malaysia is formed through the merger of the Federation of Malaya and the British Crown Colony of Singapore, North Borneo. The world is a dangerous place in 1963. September 25th, Dominican Republic, Juan Bosch is deposed by a coup d'etat led by the military with civilian support. A revolution starts in Ratvan, South Yemen, against British colonial rule on October 14th. Yemen is still a dangerous spot. The Organization of African Unity was formed. 30 to 32 independent nations met in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to form the Organization of African Unity. It was a great outgrowth of the Pan-American movement that was begun by W.E.B. Du Bois and other African intellectuals. Great Britain granted Kenya independence within the British Commonwealth on December 12th. Michael DeBakey, artificial heart pump. DeBakey installs an artificial heart pump to assist the patient's damaged heart in Houston on July 19th. Approval was given for a vaccine against measles. You know what's going on in this country with measles vaccines now, right? 1963, there was a totally different mindset. John Enders developed a vaccine. There's Kennedy with Tito in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia became the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in April, and the country's leader, Joseph Broz Tito, was named president for life. The changes to the European nation's name and Tito's authority were part of several socialist reforms added to the country's constitution that year. And finally, a portable TV in Japan. Didn't sell well in America, but it sold well in Japan. This guy's in the hospital watching portable TV. So, what about Camelot? Is the whole story about JFK and Camelot fiction or the truth?
Half and half.
I don't even know if it's half and half. It's November 29th, and Jacqueline Kennedy, 4 days after his burial, and the widowed mother of 2 children invited Life magazine journalist Theodore H. Weiss, to the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. She knew Weiss, or rather White, his name was Weiss, when she was a photographer for Washington newspaper back in the 1950s. She wanted White to help rescue her husband's legacy by linking his presidency to King Arthur and the Round Table. Camelot was running on Broadway at that point. The lines he loved to hear were, "Don't let it be forgotten that there once was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." It's a problem with that. JFK hated musicals. The long-term impact, that's the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was at the pulpit there. Lyndon Johnson would sign a civil rights law into law in 1964. The Beatles conquered the United States in 1964. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would be killed in 1968. Saddam Hussein would seize power in Syria in 1969. The United States would escalate its Vietnam involvement in 1964. The Warren Commission said Oswald acted as a lone assassin in the JFK matter. Khrushchev would be ousted in 1964. Man landed on the moon in 1969. John Lewis was beaten up in 1965, nearly killed. Tito would die in 1980. Yugoslavia would break apart. Saddam Hussein would terrorize his people. He was toppled in 2003, hanged in 2006. John Lewis, the last of the Big Six, would pass away in 2020. The al-Assad family was finally ousted in the last couple of years in Syria. And women are still seeking equal pay in the United States for the same job a man does, even if they have equal experience or equal education. Any questions, any comments? Your turn to talk about 1963. You lived it.